Hi, I'm Shane Haron, anxiety specialist, and in today's video I'm going to be speaking about my own personal method that I've refined over years and years working with hundreds of clients based on what actually works in the real world. So I call this the Haron method, obviously named after myself, Shane Haron, and this is a bottom-up somatic approach to anxiety. This has been created literally through trial and error of when I've been working with so many clients, the things that have actually worked, and when things haven't worked, what the answers I've come up with to counteract that thing. So I've finally got to a position now where I've created a system where if you're in this system and you follow it to a T, I can guarantee your results. Now, the three biggest obstacles with working with this system is one, being willing to face your feelings, take responsibility and actually be willing to feel them. Two, taking responsibility for yourself and taking action when you need to. And three, willingness to prove yourself wrong. Because if you want to change anything in your life, you have to be wrong about something. You have to be wrong, maybe it's a perception, maybe it's a learning, maybe it's an understanding. But something has to be changed or learning needs to be made. So you have to be willing to drop your ego and be willing to explore yourself and understand yourself. This method is an invitation for you to understand you, because it's all about you exploring yourself. It's not about me exploring you. I don't like the therapist kind of client model. I am merely a guide. And when I'm working with someone, I'm guiding someone to listen to their own body who's trying to speak to them. If you experience anxiety, it's because your body's trying to speak to you, but you just don't know how to understand or listen to it or communicate or connect with yourself. You feel very disconnected. So there's three parts to this method. This is again based on all the things that I've kind of just learned from working with clients of what's worked and what hasn't worked and what they may have needed when it hasn't worked. I wasn't able to provide them at the time. So this has just evolved over time, and I'm sure this will continue to refine and evolve in the future. So there's three parts and there's 5 R's. So the first part is re-education. Now again, this is because there's a lot of misinformation about anxiety and a lot of people just don't fully understand it. So we need to be kind of educated to kind of understand, to be able to explore ourselves and the right approach. So this is typically what I cover mostly in the courses, such as the Anxiety Foundation course and the other courses that you can find in my member vault. The second part is reconnection and regulation. So before you can explore your feelings, remember this bottom-up approach to safety first, then your emotions, and then the thinking or the stories. So we have to first be able to reconnect with ourselves, reconnect with our body, our felt sense, reconnect with our emotions, and regulate. Now this is sometimes the obstacle for some clients. So they're not ready to kind of explore themselves yet because it feels too overwhelming. This is what I found early on when I was working with clients. And I found that sometimes when I'd be working or doing the kind of deeper work, some people would be a little bit resistant because their whole life they've been running away from themselves. They've not learned to actually kind of be present with their feelings, which is completely normal. So there's nothing wrong with you. It just means that you need to spend more time, and ideally really everybody would work on this level first. So it's reconnection and regulation. Reconnecting with your felt self, exploring your feelings, knowing what you're feeling, and being able to be okay with your feelings because you can regulate your nervous system. This is where I've created the Resilience Club. So the Resilience Club is an online membership where we meet up online 3 times a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. and Sundays at 10 a.m. In these sessions, essentially it's just like you are now watching me, and there'll be many other people with you watching. Now, nobody has to have their sound on or their video on, and for the first 30 minutes, we talk about any kind of questions that have come up. I answer people's questions. And what you'll find is, even though other people's questions have been answered, it will likely answer questions that you probably didn't even know you had. Because the answers to anxiety, the framework of how you deal with it, is the same for everybody. I don't need to know someone's interpersonal stories to give them the answer that they need. But a lot of these things are so interplayed, and it really helps as well, knowing and understanding that you're not the only person going through this, and hearing other people going what they're going through makes you kind of realize, oh, this actually is very, very normal. So we spend 30 minutes doing a Q&A. this is where I'll have kind of pre-received questions, which can be completely anonymous. I don't even have to know who's asked the question. And essentially you're getting a first-class expert to answer your questions directly 3 times a week. We may talk about certain topics, things like boundaries, emotional expression, how to heal trauma, any certain topics or things that come up or questions that come up. Typically we'll go over them for 30 minutes. We then spend the next 30 minutes doing somatic exercises where we're connecting to ourselves and connecting to a feeling of safety. We're creating safety within. We're teaching the body how to regulate. These are the tools that you need when you're going through life on a day-to-day basis. So, when we experience anxiety, when we're experiencing it live, what we need is to regulate. We need to actually, to get through life and be able to take action, we need to regulate the nervous system enough so we can move forward to take action. Anxiety is a very, very normal feeling. The problem with it isn't the anxiety feeling itself. It's when we feel too overwhelmed and it stops us from taking action for whatever that thing is. It stops us from moving towards that goal, whatever that thing is that we're trying to achieve. So we first need to learn to regulate. So we spend 30 minutes practicing all those somatic skills, and this is where we may spend time breaking negative beliefs, releasing some emotions, so we do some release work as well. And then we finish the last 30 minutes with a sober breath meditation. Now, if you've ever done breath work, this is the most powerful breath work that I've ever done. It takes you on a much deeper level and it combines meditation, music, and breath work. We go through a series of rhythmic breathing. This creates coherence in the body, and it also trains your nervous system. So it actually helps build up and strengthen your vagus nerve, which is almost like the muscle for your parasympathetic nervous system. It's not a muscle, but it's just an easy way to understand it. And we want to be able to have a good vagal tone, a strong vagus nerve system. And this is what the breath work helps. But what it also helps us to do is reconnect with ourselves on a very, very deep level. Connecting to your deepest, most authentic self, whether you call that your soul, your spirit, or you feel like you're connected to source. When you experience it, you'll know what I'm feeling. You know what I'm saying. Now, feeling it is a difference between thinking it and knowing it. When you feel something, you really, really know something. Same way if I asked you, how do you know that you're in love? It's just a feeling. It's a feeling that you just know. This is why sometimes we have to experience things to understand things. And when you experience the first session, if you go through the sober breath, you will understand what I'm saying. So in the method, or in my Haron method, that'd be part 2. And we can do this, typically it would be ideal if you went through part 1, part 2, part 3. But it's re-education. Then the second part is reconnection and regulation. This is where we do things like the Resilience Club, or you're just basically learning things like yoga breathing, you're learning to regulate your nervous system. And then the third part is release and rewrite. This is the deeper stuff that we need to do. So if you understand that there's 2 kind of types to anxiety, there's specific anxieties. So say for example, if I only get anxiety when I go to certain places and I have certain triggers, that's learned anxiety, that's a conditioned response. That would have been because I would have been in a certain situation, I've had a certain experience before my life, where I felt overwhelmed in that moment, and I didn't feel safe to express that emotion. So there'll be some emotion there, there'll be an experience that we'd have learned, and that's what's being re-triggered when I'm in certain situations. The second type of anxiety is when we're having that nervous system dysregulation to many things. This is often known as generalized anxiety disorder. This is when we feel like we don't have the capacity to deal with life. So imagine that imagine this is you, and this is anxiety, or this is your problems. We experience anxiety when we're at our capacity, when we're feeling overwhelmed. So if this is you, anything below this shouldn't cause you anxiety. Maybe some things do, but a lot of things maybe won't. Now, what we want to do is when we're here, pretty much everything is making you experience anxiety. Everything's feeling overwhelming because it's above your capacity to deal with it. So when we're building resilience, what we're doing, we're bringing up our ability to deal with things. So when imagine you're here, you can have all of this kind of stress. You'll have a lot more capacity to deal with life, a lot more capacity to deal with stress. And that's because you have a healthy functioning nervous system that is resilient to anxiety and to stress. This is what we focus on in the Resilience Club. When it's specific learned condition response, That's what we focus on, the deeper stuff, with the release and rewrite. So this is when it comes to kind of maybe experiences that we've had, maybe some traumas we've experienced. And what it requires us to do is to revisit those experiences and basically express what we didn't express in that time. And we do this in a very specific way. So first we need to kind of know what we need to go back to. And this isn't a thinking thing. It's not as if sometimes people do know, some people do know what it's related to, but often you may be getting triggered, or you may be getting certain emotions or certain, so again, it doesn't have to be an anxiety. It may be a certain emotional response you get in certain situations. Maybe it's a certain perception that keeps coming up, or a certain story that keeps coming up. These are all learned responses. So when it happens, when your body responds in a kind of, a typical kind of way, that feeling that your body responds with is the memory. So we work somatically, we work through the body. Now this is why it's not a top-down approach, where essentially I'm listening to your body, and I'm noticing things that you're not noticing, and I'm teaching you to listen, and just you're exploring yourself, you're exploring your body. When we trigger it, we only need to think about what we need to think about to trigger the response. That's why I don't need to spend hours and hours, listening to the stories and making you feel, not very nice, and me getting, connected and feeling a bit emotional too. I don't need to do that. We just need you to think about whatever that thing is, and then we can trigger the response. This is why it's a lot better than sort of talk therapies, because a lot of people, when you're triggered in those responses, like your prefrontal cortex is pretty much switched off. That's the communication center of your brain. That's why it's very hard to talk about certain experiences. I don't need you to talk about it, but obviously we do talk about things after or during if we need to understand it. But this is more about a somatic approach. So first we talk about it to trigger it, and once we've triggered your body response, as soon as your body responds, we go inwards into the body. We notice what we're feeling, where we're feeling it, maybe how strong the feeling is, and then we'll ask a series of questions which will bring up what that's maybe linked to. And the earliest experience you have, that is the imprint, rather than the replay of the pattern that you're experiencing. So when we go back to the imprint, we first create safety. So we'll use different techniques for your body to actually feel safe, to explore your own inner sense, your own inner feelings. And then you explore the wounded child, the younger you that felt what they felt, but it didn't feel safe to express at the time. And then we'll help you to express those feelings. We'll release those feelings. And you may connect to yourself and feel those feelings for a short moment. But after you've expressed those feelings, you've broken that pattern, it'll be gone for good. So that pattern will never ever play out again for that same situation, for that same feeling, that same pattern of emotion, maybe with the same story as well. Once you've cleared the emotion, we then rewrite the story. So once you've released, we then rewrite. Rewriting the story is when we're seeing it from a different perception, and we can observe it, and then we can make the learnings that we was more helpful to make rather than the negative learnings we made. So all of our negative beliefs about ourselves, about other people, about the world are typically shaped from our experiences that was emotionally fueled. Once you clear the emotions, belief doesn't make any sense. So especially things like I'm not good enough, things like that, we know that there's emotional connection there. If you was to close your eyes and say it out loud 3 times, if your body resonates, if you say, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, typically if you're paying attention, there'll be a visceral response in your stomach or your chest area. This is a sign that there's still emotions there that are fueling this belief. When we go back to these experiences and we release it, the story doesn't make any sense because it was the emotions that was fueling it. We then have an opportunity to rewrite the story. So that's when we rewrite a story and learn what was maybe appropriate to learn at the time, or the right thing that we should have learned. And then we then reintegrate that part into us, and it breaks that pattern for good. This is the true way of how to heal. So this is the method that I've created. And this is a process that I've refined time and time again. And I'm sure, maybe in a year's time after this video, it will maybe a very different process. But it has to grow as much as I'm growing, the process grows, and the experience with my clients. So this is how you want to resolve anxiety. First, you want to have not only healed the patterns that of the unresolved emotions, expressed emotions we can express ourselves, because we will eventually want to get to authenticity. So the idea is it's called 100% you. So the idea is when you're first born, you're born 100% whole. Now, when you're born 100% whole, your most authentic self, your true being, your soul's alive. So you see it, little kids, they're very emotionally expressive. They're very themselves. Now, if you look at a toddler, when they're happy, it's the happiest thing in the world. When they're sad, it's the saddest thing in the world. When they're angry, they have throw a massive sort of tantrum. They're very expressive. Now, when we are experiencing something in life and we don't feel safe, we don't express that. We suppress it. We hold it in, and that part of us splits off. So rather than being 100% whole, maybe a part of us splits off, and a part of us splits off where it feels what it felt, and it's thinking what it thought in that moment. It's the story. That's the pattern. And that pattern is created. So imagine if, I was 5 years old and I came home to show my dad my schoolwork that I was really proud of, something that I made. And I was going, oh, dad. And then he was like, oh, not now, Shane. I'm busy. Talk to me later something. And in that moment, I may have felt rejected, abandoned. I felt hurt. And in my mind, my little 5-year-old mind, I might have thought, I'm not good enough. So even though logically our adult mind can understand and accept that wasn't the reality, what sticks is the part of us that experienced it. That part of me broke off. And what happens as we go through life is that any situation that matches that pattern will jump up. So I'll regress back to that 5-year-old self, and I'll feel that same abandoned, hurt, rejected feeling, and I'll think that same I'm not good enough for. Now this is why we have certain strategies and even behaviors to avoid these certain things. We may even subconsciously attract it. So you may notice that some people, you see some people in abusive relationships where they're in abusive relationship after abusive relationship. You're like, how do you find these people? And it's because your subconscious will attract situations in your present adult day life to heal the wounded child, because it wants you to heal. This is your body's way, your wounded child, your inner wounded child's way to get the healing it needs. It's trying to get your attention. So anxiety is when we're kind of not listening to ourselves. So in terms of changing these patterns, we have loads of parts of us that's still calling out for healing from our childhood. When we work through each of these patterns, a part of us returns back to ourselves. And the more work that we do, so with my one-to-one work, I typically start with people with 4 sessions to kind of teach them my process, teach them the Haron method. The more work you do, the more patterns you work, the more you integrate those lost parts back into you, the 100% you. And the more you return back to the 100% you, the more you return to your authentic self, the true you. So when you're truly yourself, without worries or fears of losing attachments to other people, you're truly taking care of your needs and your responsibility, your feelings, and you are your true authentic self, and you're feeling so connected to yourself. That's the end goal of anxiety. So that's working through these different patterns, but we also need the resilience to face everything else in life. And this just comes with just working and rebuilding the nervous system through things like the exercise that we do in the Resilience Club. So this is ultimately how you want to resolve anxiety: the re-education, building up resilience so you can handle life in general, so you can always, no matter what you experience, that you can regulate through it. This is, building up the reconnecting with yourself and regulating. That's how we build a resilience to face anything there is in life. And when you believe in your own ability to face anything in life, that's when you're truly anxiety proof. That's future proofing you against anxiety. Then the third part is the deeper work, which when you feel that your ability to feel safe within yourself and regulate anything that you may face, you're going to feel a bit more comfortable with exploring your deeper feelings that you may have avoided for a long time. This is when we go into the release and rewrite, where we break the old patterns and we heal what needs to be healed within us, what we didn't feel safe enough to express in the past. This is how we heal these old childhood wounds or these past traumas. And once you heal all of those, you'll break your emotional triggers and the anxiety triggers that you may have learned from the past. So this essentially, when you work through this whole system, you'll eventually get to a point where nothing triggers the anxiety anymore because you've worked through your triggers, you've leveled up, you've returned back to your authentic self, and only that is when you can live in the present and be your full adult self, meeting your adult needs versus your wounded child that's getting triggered and regressed and trying to meet these old childhood needs. Most of the strategies and behaviors that you do, every single strategy and every single behavior that you do has a good intention behind it. But often when you don't understand it or it doesn't make sense to you, it's not very helpful, it's because they're trying to meet the needs of the wounded child. And they're using strategies that you may have learned when you was a child rather than you're meeting your present adult needs. So if you want to fully beat anxiety, you have to be willing to explore yourself and take responsibility for you, of your feelings. Now, naturally, when we are kind of wounded and we are feeling anxiety, again, it's not so much what happens to us, but what didn't happen to us. So when we was growing up, not feeling heard, not feeling supported, not having that safety to truly just be ourselves and express ourselves and somebody else to help nurture us and regulate us when we was younger. And this is why, as adults, we often seek other people to meet our needs, because we are seeing the wounded child in other people and other people seeing the wounded child in us. And this is why the therapist-client model doesn't work. Because if I'm parenting you in a way, sometimes, that parent-to-child relationship is almost like I'm doing the healing for you and you don't learn to do it yourself. And sometimes initially that is what's needed. So that does happen when I'm working with someone. Why I'm helping you to nurture and heal yourself, I can hold that space for you. But ultimately, my whole method is I'm teaching you to do it for yourself. So initially, we would do the 4 sessions, one-to-one. We may continue doing the one-to-one work if necessary, but my goal is always to get you on 2 feet so you can start taking care of yourself. Obviously, it's a lot easier to work through some of the more sort of painful things or more of the more overwhelming experiences and more overwhelming feelings with somebody else that can hold space for you. And what holding space means is the ability to help you to feel safe, to just be you without any judgment. I will never judge any client. When I'm working with a client, I'm not interjecting any of my own stories, my own thoughts, my own sort of feelings. I am coming completely neutral, and my job is literally to guide you into yourself safely and guiding you through the process so you can heal and process whatever you need to process. So I take my job very, very seriously. So if you are interested in working with me, just give me a shout. But for most people, I would recommend going through that pathway, the re-education part. Start with the Anxiety Foundation course, learn everything that you need to learn. Then maybe join the Resilience Club. Learn how to actually regulate and learn how to regulate your nervous system. Maybe you bought the Anxiety Stopper. That is the most important thing that you need to learn, so you can actually be with yourself. And then once you can actually be with yourself and you're willing to explore yourself and explore your feelings and go into them, that's when you may be ready to do the bottom-up work, the somatic work with me one-to-one. Hopefully this has answered your question. If you do have any questions you have about anxiety, do let me know. You can typically find me on Instagram @anxietyspecialist or reach out via my website through my email. But I'm here to help you. If anything that comes up, even when I'm working with a client, there has to be 100% honesty, because it's not about me, it's not about you. And a lot of time, there will be resistance that comes up. There may be certain feelings and certain thoughts you may be having about me that comes up. That's absolutely fine. I'm never going to take offense. I'm never going to judge you. You have to feel safe when you're working with me. So that is always the goal. So anything, I have to have that open and honest relationship with someone where anything they're experiencing, they just have to let me know. And it's absolutely fine, because your body is the guide. We are learning, and we're a team where we're listening to your body and healing whatever comes up. But your body is leading the process. So hopefully this answered people's questions. Again, if there's anything that you'd like to know or any questions you may have any further, do just drop me a message. Until then, take care, and I wish you well.